I have added a new review for On Writing Romance by Leigh Michaels. This is a must read if your core story is the developing relationship between a man and a woman. This book made me realize that I am writing a romance, which explains why I got writer's block when I felt I needed to keep the lovers apart during the last third of the book. A romance novel is the story of a man and a woman who, while they're solving a problem that threatens to keep them apart, discover that the love they feel for each other is the sort that comes along only once in a lifetime. This discovery leads to a permanent commitment and happy ending. There are exceptions, but that's the basic romance novel formula. She discusses the different romance categories and the requirements of writing for each throughout the book. It's important to have an idea which category your work falls under so you can see how you're developing the story will work for your particular category. In my particular romance, my novel seems to be a blend of time travel, inspirational, futuristic, and single title. So I paid particular attention to the requirements for these categories as she discussed them. If you want to write for posterity, this is the book you need to read. This is the comprehensive go-to book for any romance writer. She states that when researching, don't be so specific that rapid change will make your story obsolete. Your time travel has to be logical and consistent to convince readers. The rules need to be consistent and believable, something that Orson Scott Card also emphasizes in his book about how to write science fiction and fantasy. External conflict in a romance is what keeps them together throughout the story. Internal conflicts are their deeper difficulties that threaten their happiness together. The romance must explore what makes them so perfect for each other, even though it doesn't seem that way at first, that their love story will remain in our minds forever. A satisfying ending comes about because of the actions of the lovers themselves, not through the interference of others. Chapter 4 on the hero and heroine may be the most important in the book, where she discusses how to create heroes and heroines that work for a love story, including their occupations, temperaments, and outlook and approach towards love and sex. Heroines need to have self-respect and be independent. Heroes need to be manly yet sensitive and can be alpha or beta, but must have heroic qualities. She has a thorough questionnaire using questions to help you create lovers that will resonate with your readers. With conflict only when the problem involves both of them and creates tension between them do you have effective conflict in a love story. Lovers need to be active versus passive as they try to solve their problems. Conflict has two aspects, short-term or situation that keeps them together through the book, and long-term or a character flaw or experience that threatens their happiness. When the immediate difficulty, the external conflict, is complicated by the kind of people they are, which is the internal conflict, you have the potential for a deeply emotional story readers can't forget. If the conflict is very intense and personal, the force keeping them together needs to be just as strong to keep them together. Romance writers need to put the lovers in situations that they can't escape, requiring them to deal with each other, no matter how much they'd like to walk away. Learning this, I made major plot changes to the last third of my book. She discusses how to write romance and recommends very much the approach that I learned from reading Bickham's Scene and Structure, where you have cause and effect. Everything that happens must be a reaction to something that happened before, cause and effect. She offers very helpful info about when to use exposition and summary and how to effectively show and not tell your story. She basically covers all the basics of fiction writing, plotting, point of view, dialogue setting, writing love scenes, etc., from the perspective of a romance writer. And you come away with a definite idea on how to handle all of these in your particular romance. A romance writer is a different animal than the other genres. And if you're writing a romance and haven't read this book, you're probably making some mistakes and don't know it. I would make this book required reading for all romance novelists. This is like a novel writing workshop for romance writers, covering every aspect of writing a romance novel, from story creation to the actual writing, like handling point of view, dialogue, narrative, setting, etc., to the marketing and publishing. She takes all the principles of good fiction writing and fine-tunes it for romance novelists so that you come away with a very clear picture of what you need to do to make your love story work brilliantly. She helped me fine-tune my ending, plot, and characters so that the love story will be more meaningful and deep to the readers. This is a real nuts and bolts book, giving you lots of effective tools to chisel that love story into a romantic masterpiece. This is a book that I'll be referring to over and over again as I work on my romance novels, which is why I give it a 6-star review. Yeah, 6 out of 5 stars. I'm certain it'll be among the top 5 writing instruction books I have in terms of its usefulness to me as I chisel my love story into that deep and meaningful story I want it to be. Even though I'll self-publish, I read the marketing and publishing section because here she details why publishers reject books, which helps you know if what you've written works. I found every chapter useful, with something in each chapter I could specifically apply to my work in progress. It was like God sent the book down from heaven just for my romance novel. My biggest problem was that I did not realize I was writing a romance. Once I realized this, my biggest problems were solved. Mrs. Michaels helped me to see that my novel is first and foremost a romance, and knowing that was the biggest hurdle I had to climb in writing my book. You see, my book kind of defies all genres. So I've been confused about what kind of book it is. It's a romance first and foremost, and I've discovered by reading this book that I am a romance writer who likes to sprinkle in time travel, science fiction and fantasy, and Bible into my stories. But I'm a romance writer, and knowing that is the first step to solving my story problems. Mrs. Michaels helped me to see that. Once I figured out it's a romance, that ending in the last 2/3 of my novel, which stumped me for almost 2 decades, is coming into my vision with clarity and precision. I chose self-publishing because my standards are higher than the traditional publishing route. So high, in fact, I'll be breaking a lot of rules effectively. And don't expect traditional publishers to have the courage to honor that. You might say, what rules are you breaking? Basically, I've created my own genre. So my book doesn't really fit in any traditional publishing category, which means all the traditional publishers would reject me. Traditional publishers are married to their categories. Though I'm writing a time travel romance, it has a very strong Christian futuristic plot with heavy Bible prophecy. So you might say that means you're writing Christian inspirational fiction. Well, there's a problem. I have some red-hot sex rape scenes, and I allow some curse words. So forget the Christian inspirational category. But the Bible prophecy part of the plot is too important to just relegate this to a time travel romance. So you might say that it's a Christian futurist novel, another problem. I don't really believe that Jesus will be using time travel much in the future, and most Christian futurist novels, like Tim LaHaye's books, present believable scenarios that honor total biblical truth as they see it. My book is a combination science fiction, fantasy, time travel, romance, and Christian futurist. It's actually a romance novel with elements of science fiction, fantasy, and Christian futurist. If I submitted this to an agent or a traditional publisher, they'd read it and think interesting, but it doesn't fit any traditional publishing category, and we aren't sure how to market this. Too risky. So I'll market and publish it myself. Jesus has shown me how to create my own book, how to self-publish without spending a cent. I don't write to a category. I write what's on my heart. Categories be damned. Thank God for Amazon. You might say, you're not allowed to do that. How dare you not write to a traditional publishing category? Who do you think you are? I'm a creative, free spirit who refuses to be caged in. I could tone down the sex scenes and the curse words and make it fit Christian inspirational category, but that would weaken the book, taking away some of the grittiness it needs to relate to future tribulation saints. To be honest with you, I find most sex scenes a bore. And the emphasis in the love story is the emotional, spiritual connection between the lovers. But I include some rape scenes because the plot requires it. I feel I've portrayed them tastefully and in keeping with the plot, but nevertheless, the Christian inspiration category does not allow any sex scenes. You might say, okay, it's a time travel romance. Well, another problem. There's way too much Bible in this for it to be a pure time travel romance. It's definitely an inspirational romance too. It's both. Also, 2 of my 3 leads are male, and the main character is male. Most romance novels feature a female lead. I'm telling a love story mainly from the point of view of men. This is one reason I've had a hard time deciding what genre my book is. But it is a romance, just mainly told from the man's point of view. I think a lot of men will be secretly reading this book. You might say, the women aren't going to like the book, but I have a female point of view character in the book, and the men are heroic. I think women may find it fascinating to get inside the heart of these heroic leads. You might say, then it's science fiction fantasy, another problem. The main conflict revolves around the romance, not the science fiction fantasy element. In fact, if I could remove the science fiction part, and it would still work, but it wouldn't be as good. I use the science fiction's fantasy to help me with suspense and sexual tension. So I've created my own category. I can hear the agents now. No, you have not. What you've written is called literary. Yeah, but that's what you call any book that ends up lasting for 100 years, which I think this book will. It's just a coward's way of labeling a book when no other label will do. But it's too much of a page turner with lots of sexual tension and suspense to read like your typical literary novel, though it does have some pretty deep passages, so I guess it's literary. But when you think of literary today as a category, it usually means the author defies conventional rules about plot and kind of does her own thing. My book has a clear beginning, middle, and end, and is pretty traditionally plotted. Where I'm breaking the rules is that I'm not writing for any particular category or genre. And I don't give a flip about word count. I won't cut a scene that needs to be there for characterization or to show how the story world ties into the main plot. Due to the epic nature of the story, it has to be long. The writing's tight, even though the book's long, because I have a pretty involved subplot that takes up some space, but it works because it's riveted in stone connected to the main romance plot. I just have more events happening than in your typical romance, which is why I can't put this in the romance genre either, even though I'd say that genre is probably where it most belongs. So why did I write such a long book? Couldn't I tell the tale shorter? Yes, I could, and the book wouldn't be as good. Because I need to develop the Bible prophecy part and to make this book as deep as I want it to be spiritually. You see, the book is epic. For the lovers to get together, they have to save the world. You can't write a book of such epic proportions in less than about 200,000 words. So you might say, you think longer is better? Oh no, I believe in tight writing. But if your plot requires more events to tell the story, then write those events tight, but write the events that need to be in the story to make it work. On the other hand, don't write so tight that you drown out your voice. Oh, and I forgot to mention, this book's going to end up probably about 180,000 to 200,000 words, way too long for any category today. Of course, traditional publishers seem to forget that Gone with the Wind, The Thornbirds, Exodus, etc., were at least that long or longer. Forget the rules. Actually, I don't like Gone with the Wind as a romance. The protagonists Scarlett and Rhett are not heroic enough for me. So I've created my own genre. It's a Christian futurist time travel romance. Despite the fantasy elements, it will have the feel of a Christian futurist novel, but despite the Christian futurist novel, the main plot revolves around the romance. The story question that needs to be answered is, will this romance work? Are these potential lovers ever going to be happy? If I had to choose a traditional publishing category, it would be time travel romance. But it has too much Bible in it to really fit this category either. You might say, I thought your inspiration was Tolkien, Lord of the Rings. Well, it was, but I've come to realize that my story's a romance. And I'll let Lord of the Rings inspire me for my subplots. However, I've got to be careful not to allow the subplot to take over the main plot or the book's ruined. What I'm going to do is make lots of connections between the setting and the love story. In other words, what happens in the story world will deeply affect the love story. Tolkien's Lord of the Rings is a very strong epic fantasy where his setting almost becomes a story in and of itself. I have epic fantasy elements, but the love story is the strongest element, and it's got to stay that way or the book's ruined. If I wrote the last 2/3 as an epic fantasy, it would violate the first 2/3 of the book, which is romance. Readers wouldn't be able to pinpoint why they lost enthusiasm for the book when they got to the 2/3 mark, but they would, and they'd think the ending didn't work. I have to be true to the romance that it is, with the emphasis on the characters and their growth and what makes them able to eventually love truly and eternally.